I used to babysit for families I knew, but this time was different. A friend of my mother mentioned that a colleague of hers needed someone to look after her child for a night. The pay was great, so I accepted right away. The child, according to his mother, was calm but quite attached to his imaginary friend, something I found amusing at the time. I arrived at the house around 6 in the evening. It was a simple house, but there was something strange about the atmosphere, a sense of oppression I couldn't quite understand. The mother, very friendly, quickly explained her 5-year-old son Tiago's routine. She casually mentioned that Tiago always talked to his imaginary friend, named David, and that I shouldn't be frightened. At the time, I thought it was just a phase of childhood. Once the mother left, I started talking to Tiago. He was a quiet boy, spoke little, but had a surprising intelligence for his age. After a while of playing in the living room, I noticed he kept staring at a corner of the room, as if he was paying attention to something invisible. I tried to ignore it, figuring it was part of his imaginary friend game. But at one point, he just stopped playing and said, "David is upset because you haven't seen him yet." That made me uncomfortable. I looked around, trying to stay calm and play along, saying something like, "Oh, sure. David, where is he now?" Tiago pointed to the window, but there was nothing there. I decided to change the subject and continued with the routine, trying not to get caught up in his imagination. Later, while I was preparing dinner, I heard laughter coming from the living room. Laughter, plural. Tiago was sitting on the floor alone, but the laughter didn't seem to come from him alone. It echoed in a way I couldn't explain. I approached and asked what he was doing, to which he calmly replied, "I'm playing with David. He wants you to play too." That feeling of discomfort grew, but I decided not to let it be a childish prank. I fed Tiago dinner and then put him to bed. He seemed calm, but when I laid him down, he asked me for something. "Leave the chair in the corner. David likes to sit there." There was a wooden chair in the room, positioned exactly in the corner. Without thinking much, I moved the chair to the place he asked, but something about that corner gave me the creeps. I closed Tiago's bedroom door and went back to the living room, feeling strangely uneasy. The night was calm for a while, until around 10 o'clock, I started hearing noises coming from the bedroom. I went to check on Tiago, and when I opened the door, my heart skipped a beat. The chair, which I had left in the corner, was now in the middle of the room, facing the bed, as if someone had been sitting there watching Tiago. I stood still for a moment, but decided it must be just my imagination. I approached the chair, put it back in the corner, and went to the bed. Tiago was sleeping soundly, with no signs of having gotten up. I closed the door and returned to the living room, trying to calm my mind. It didn't last long. About half an hour later, I heard a crash. I ran to the bedroom and, once again, the chair was in the center of the room, facing the bed. My heart raced. Tiago was still asleep, but something was wrong. Then he began to talk in his sleep. Amidst his whispers, I heard him say, "David is angry. He wants you to leave." That was enough for me. I closed the bedroom door, sat on the living room sofa, and waited for the parents to return. The hours seemed to drag, and the silence of the house suffocated me. What unsettled me most was the certainty that something was watching, waiting. When the parents arrived, I didn't mention anything about the chair, but the mother smiled at my discomfort. "Did Tiago talk about David?" she asked, almost as if she were used to it. I said yes, but didn't go into details. They didn't seem concerned at all, as if it was normal for them. I never babysat for them again. I needed some extra cash to help with college expenses, and when I came across an ad for a family looking for a babysitter for the weekend, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. The pay was good, and since it was a large house in an upscale neighborhood, I thought it would be a quiet night. The parents were away, and the boy, Samuel, was about 6 years old, an easy age to handle, or so I thought. When I arrived at the house in the late afternoon, I was impressed by its size. It was an old mansion, the kind that looked like it had been built centuries ago. As she showed me around, Samuel's mother was clear about one thing. I was absolutely not to go into one wing of the house. There was a heavy door at the end of the second-floor hallway, always locked. She said it was dangerous because it was under renovation with an unstable floor. I didn't question it and agreed. The evening started off peacefully. Samuel was a calm boy, and we spent some time watching TV until he began to yawn. I put him to bed around 9 and returned to the living room, thinking it would be an easy night. But after an hour, the silence of the house began to weigh on me. I could hear the strong wind hitting the windows, and everything felt much quieter than it should. Then I heard a faint noise. It seemed to come from upstairs, where the locked wing was. The sound was subtle, like something being dragged. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was the wind or some common noise of an old house. But soon the noise returned, louder this time. It sounded metallic, like a door being opened. My heart raced, but I took a deep breath and tried not to give in to fear. I decided to go upstairs and check on Samuel. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the door to the forbidden wing was slightly ajar. I clearly remembered it being locked when I went up with Samuel earlier. I stood frozen for a few seconds, listening carefully. There was a strange feeling in the air, as if that part of the house was colder. The noise I had heard before seemed to be coming from inside that room now, but I didn't have the courage to enter. Instead, I ran to Samuel's room and found him sleeping soundly, unaware of any unusual happenings. I decided to brush off what I had heard. I went back downstairs, but the unease didn't go away. The feeling that something or someone was upstairs consumed me. Nearly half an hour later, I heard soft, continuous footsteps coming from the hallway above. But Samuel was in his room, asleep. So who was walking around the house? I grabbed my phone and considered calling his parents, but I knew it would sound strange. Who would call the homeowners just because they heard noises in a renovated wing? I remained frozen, listening to the footsteps coming and going, until suddenly, they stopped. It was then that I heard the metallic creak again. This time, the sound echoed through the hallway, coming directly from the locked door. I was only a few feet from the stairs when something caught my attention. A beam of light appeared under the door of the forbidden wing, as if someone had turned on a lamp inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps an intruder? I wanted to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound stopped. Suddenly, the light under the door went out and silence returned. I didn't have the courage to investigate further, so I locked myself in Samuel's room until dawn. The next morning, the parents arrived. When I mentioned what had happened to his mother, she simply smiled and said, "That happens. The house is old. Noises are normal." But something about the way she said it, as if she expected it, made me feel there was more to that forbidden wing than just a renovation. I never went back. I needed quick cash to cover some debts, so I accepted a babysitting job for a family living in a huge, isolated house on the outskirts of town. The offer came through a local job website. The couple seemed normal during the phone interview, but something about the way they spoke made me feel uneasy. Still, I accepted. The pay was generous and I only had to stay a few hours, so I figured it would be fine. When I arrived at the house just before dusk, the strange impression grew stronger. The residence was enormous but appeared poorly maintained. The lights were dim, and there was an unsettling silence in the air. Upon opening the door, I was greeted by Marta, the mother, who was very hurried and barely made eye contact. She briefly explained that her son, Arthur, was in his room, already fed and ready for bed. The father, Richard, also appeared, a tall, serious man with a somewhat absent demeanor. He said little, just nodded as he pulled his wife towards the door, hastening their departure. Once they left, the house became eerily quiet. I went to Arthur's room to check on him. He was about 8 years old, sitting on the bed completely still, staring intently at a spot on the wall. When I entered, he didn't move. It gave me an uncomfortable feeling, but I approached and tried to be friendly. "Hi, Arthur. Your parents have left. How are you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He just shook his head without shifting his gaze from the wall. I stayed there for a few minutes, hoping he'd say something, but couldn't get a word out of him. I decided not to push it and left him alone, hoping he was just shy or tired. I returned to the living room and tried to relax, but the discomfort lingered. The house was large, dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen, like someone moving pots and pans. I thought Arthur might have gotten up to get some water or food, so I went to check. When I entered the kitchen, everything was in place, except for one thing. The refrigerator, which had been closed earlier, was now slightly open. I checked it, and it was empty, completely clean, as if it hadn't been used in ages. The strange thing was, Arthur's parents said he had eaten dinner, but there was no sign of food, not even dirty dishes. It made me uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I decided to go back to the living room, but on the way, I heard footsteps upstairs. I ran up the stairs, thinking Arthur might be out of bed, but when I reached his room, he was in exactly the same position, sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. This time he spoke. "Did you see them too?" I froze in the middle of the room, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Who, Arthur?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He vaguely pointed towards the hallway. "They live here. They're always watching." I tried to convince myself he was just making things up, but something in the way he said it made me feel he truly believed what he was saying. I decided to leave him alone again and went back to the living room, this time with a heavy feeling in my chest. The night remained strangely calm, but I couldn't shake off what Arthur had said. Every now and then, I heard noises from upstairs, as if someone was walking around, but whenever I checked, Arthur was always in the same spot, unmoving. Finally, near midnight, Arthur's parents returned. When they opened the door, I noticed they seemed different. They appeared lighter, almost as if they had shed a great burden. Marta, the mother, quickly asked how the night went, showing little interest in my response. I told her Arthur was fine but very quiet. She shrugged and said he had always been that way. They paid me and, in a hurry, dismissed me. As I left the house, I felt an immense sense of relief. But before I drove away, I looked one last time at Arthur's room window. He was still there, standing, now looking out the window, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone else standing next to him, someone who didn't resemble either Marta or Richard. The feeling of unease stayed with me for days. I never wanted to babysit again.